You're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam. Streaming on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and at DCAUreview.com. Now, here's today's episode.
Welcome, everybody, to bonus episode number 10 of the DCAU Review. I am Liam, and with me, as he always is my brother and good friend, Cal. And Cal, we're taking a little bit of a break. We've most of our bonus episodes this year have focused on the exciting Batman: The Adventures Continues comic books that have been coming out. But considering that those comic books are in fact based on these DC Direct Batman: The Adventures Continues toy lines, that got us thinking. There's been a lot of great toy lines over the years, especially from the DC Direct brand, also known as DC Collectibles for a while there. And so we thought it would be fun to do, actually, this will be part one of what we are calling the DC DirectRospective.
That's right, yeah. Unfortunately, as we've said, there have been a lot of great figures and products that have been created by DC Direct / DC Collectibles, but just a few short weeks ago, we learned that through the merger of AT&T and I guess was Time Warner or whatever that company was that AT&T ended up purchasing, that was the parent company of Warner Brothers, that after 22 years and thousands of products produced by the DC Direct brand, that they will be shuttering probably in the not too distant future. And that was some difficult news, not only as collectors, because we love collecting things. We are both collectors at heart. Collecting and comic book love go hand in hand. There's been a lot of things that have been produced by DC Direct and / DC Collectibles relating specifically to the DCAU, but even the DC brand as a whole, there's been a lot of memorable things. So that was sad. And of course, as we've pointed out several times, the fact that there have been many people, the artists behind creating these products, the sculptors, the painters, the people that are pitching these ideas for different toy lines and statues and all the other tie-in products that DC Direct has produced over the last 2 decades plus. It's a sad time, and it's an era that we had the fortunate blessing to live through, and unfortunately with DC deciding to sort of maybe do more licensing, I think it's an era that we will look back on and say, man, that was the golden age of things being produced that we probably won't get a lot of chance at doing in the future.
Yeah, and a lot of artists and creators, as you mentioned, a lot of sculptors and artists, as great as, say, some of the Mattel DC toy lines have been, or now obviously we have McFarlane Toys line, or going back in time, like Kenner days. Like, there's a lot of great toys produced, but rarely would you get something so specific that was based on specific comic book series or specific comic book artists. There's probably not going to be a lot of room for like a Jason Fabok inspired line of toys in this new McFarlane wave, or a Greg Capullo style line of figures. So it was the specialty that they took it with, and we'll certainly get into that through. We're going to highlight just some of our favorites. We're not going to try to go through every series of action figures that the DC Direct / DC Collectibles produce, but just some standouts that we love. But yeah, I think we will sorely miss the sort of the specificity that DC Direct was able to produce, either based on certain storylines or basing entire lines on just certain artists' renditions of these characters. That's certainly, there's going to be a pretty big hole left with DC Direct closing its doors, at least for now.
Yeah, and I think it's obviously 22 years worth of stuff. Looking back, that means that for me, this whole thing started when I was 10 and you were 6. So that is the giant portion of our lives, so much so that you kind of become accustomed to seeing things on a shelf. Like, it's not weird to see some of these characters that had never been done in action figure form. When you think about it, obviously the Superpowers line of the 1980s, which is a little bit before both of our time as far as collecting, was sort of an anomaly in that you got some of these ancillary characters and some people that weren't just Batman or Superman. I remember at a young age getting my hands on the first Superpowers Wonder Woman figure and thinking, man, this is awesome. I can't imagine having a Wonder Woman figure mass produced. Obviously, we've entered an age now, and Mattel and the Four Horsemen that sculpted the DC Universe Collectibles line or DC Universe Classics line in that sort of 2002 to 2007 era, and then moving past that when Mattel moved on to the Multiverse line. We got a lot of characters there that you typically wouldn't see, but I think they owe a lot of that to DC Direct, because DC Direct opened those doors to be able to put these particular characters, like you said, a mass market company like a Mattel or like McFarlane right now, they may be able to throw in maybe a real unique character once every 2 or 3 lines. But thinking about it and what their strategy is and what they have to compete with is they're going to mass market, they're putting these action figures on your store shelves, and there's still a significant portion of those companies and marketing that look at toys and action figures not as collectibles and not to be marketed towards adult collectors but towards children. So there's always that portion of those big box stores, Walmart, your Targets, your whatever other companies are carrying these action figures, that are going to be reluctant to put something on the shelf that is as sort of out there as a Kilowog or a Mongol, or even characters that have been more sort of in the public eye as of late. Some of the Wonder Woman villains or Aquaman villains. There's going to be a hesitation just because there's not that brand recognizability. But what DC Direct did was say, hey, we're not marketing these to big box stores. These are going right to the collectors. These are marketed for collectors. And we're gonna sell them through the main channel of where collectors go to, and that's through your local comic book store. So it was a brilliant, to me, looking back at it, it's a brilliant strategy that had not been necessarily done before, and sort of innovated this line. Now you have multiple different companies that do direct to collectors lines, or have realized that you can kind of go around your typical big box stores and get action figures in the hands of collectors. We live in a new age where shopping online is the easiest thing. You can market directly to your consumer. But this, in 1998 or 1999, when DC Direct first launched, that was what they did with their first line of figures. They did a Golden Age Sandman, 2 different versions, by the way. The first line was 3 different characters all 3 with variants. So there was a Golden Age Sandman, one was a regular version, one was a Justice Society variant. Then they had a Wonder Woman. Again, you think about it at the time. Nowadays, you can walk into most big box stores and pick yourself up a Gal Gadot Wonder Woman figure, but you couldn't get Wonder Woman in a 6-inch scale or a 7-inch scale. Wonder Woman figures hadn't been produced really to mass market outside of maybe a Total Justice figure from Hasbro that was sort of a one-off. You couldn't just walk into a store and get that, because the mindset of girls don't buy action figure, or boys don't buy girl action figures, was still the main thought there. So you have a Wonder Woman who had a variant in her armor also, and then you had a Swamp Thing who ironically himself had his own toy line based on a movie in the 80s, but really had been sort of this afterthought of a character. But you have Swamp Thing. So really right off the bat, DC Direct said, hey, listen, we're going to take what the fans want, and that is some of these ancillary characters that garner interest but aren't readily available to go walk into a store and get, and they just sort of jumped off from there.
Absolutely, and that like you pointed out, that's sort of the genesis of this line. And obviously, DC Direct didn't just make action figures; they obviously did a lot of statues and other collectibles, busts and maquettes and stuff like that. That's not really what we're gonna. Yeah, helmets,
helmets, masks,
Green
cowls.
Lantern power batteries, like all of this crazy stuff, and it's all incredible. And maybe in a future edition of this, we might look into some of that. But neither of us quite have the love for the statue game as we do for action figures. So we're for our little 2-part bonus episodes that we're doing here on this DC Direct Retrospective, we're gonna keep it to just some of our favorite action figure lines. But definitely that's something we'd like to get some feedback from you on, whether it is your favorite action figure lines, just a single toy that you liked, or even some of those other products. We'd love to have you tweet us at DCAU Review or leave us a comment on our Instagram, also at DCA Review. Because I think this line, as you mentioned, Cal, is already has and will only continue to sort of generate more good feelings and nostalgia as time goes on.
Yeah, and I mean, I know that there's certainly a portion of people that look at collectibles as an investment, and that's a huge thing right now. If you've been paying attention to the market on collectibles, I don't know if it's because of COVID, I don't know if it's because of just where we are in the economy or what it is, but prices on things of collectibles, especially things that are sort of final, like at this point there's going to be a very limited amount of DC Direct stuff in the future being released. Now that they've announced it's being closed, there's certain things that are going to end up released in very small runs. So if you're an investor, if you look at this as an investment type thing, these things are only going to increase in value. But hopefully you also get some enjoyment out of it, and you're not just looking to flip them and make a quick buck. But there are things that I think both of us have that are certainly valuable when it comes to the marketplace. But I think the enjoyment that you truly, as a collector, get out of it is being able to add those pieces a part of your collection.
For sure, and we're gonna get into the meat and potatoes of it. Like we said, we're gonna single out a few of our favorite lines. For part one here, we're going to focus mostly on lines that were inspired by specific artists. So we are kicking this off, Cal, with a couple of the Alex Ross inspired lines. Obviously, Alex Ross, one of the most prolific and famous comic book artists. I think even if you don't read comic books, you may know the name Alex Ross, or you've at least seen his work. And he had several lines, of course, one being based off his and Mark Waid's Kingdom Come series, and then later on the line he had a massive series from his book, which he wrote and drew, called Justice. But let's kick it off with the Kingdom Come line, Cal. What are some of the standouts to you from those Alex Ross Kingdom Come figures?
First of all, I think just in general, when I think if you were to tell me, give me the most iconic lines from DC Direct, period, I think Alex Ross, between both the Kingdom Come and the Justice League or the Justice series, I think both of those would have to be either, they're definitely top 5, if not top 2, most iconic lines that were done. Because when you think about it, like you mentioned in the intro that we talked about, like, not only are these action figures specifically designed after the artwork, the artists were involved in a lot of the direction and the design of the 3D. So you're taking a 2D dimension, a 2D image and making it into 3D. So they relied a lot on the actual artists themselves and included them in the production of these 3D images. And I think for me, I love Kingdom Come. It's such a visual. Alex Ross is just an icon. I mean, you look at his stuff and it's bringing that superhero fantasy into real life because of the realism involved in his artwork. So then translating that to a 7-inch or a 6.5-inch tall action figure 3D form is not, it's a tall task in and of itself, and keeping that realism true to the original artwork. And I think that these lines just absolutely killed that. They absolutely did an incredible job of translating that iconic imagery from both of those books. Again, this is also something that has such a legacy behind it that if done the wrong way, you could make a lot of people upset about the way that it turns out. But yeah, as you mentioned, so we aren't going to go through a lot of this stuff. DC Direct ended up releasing in box sets or in multi-packs later on, or re-releases or reactivation lines. Some of these figures were released multiple times, but you start out hot right out of the box with the DC Direct Series 1 Kingdom Come. That was released in 2003. So you have Green Lantern, and again, this is from the Kingdom Come. So these are all the older versions of these these characters, all these, more seasoned, experienced, different looks, very unique looks that were designed by Alex Ross himself. So you have Green Lantern in that iconic sort of green armor.
Yes.
You have Hawkman, who, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he's actually part hawk. He's like more hawk than man.
Yes, he may in fact have been a cousin of Mr. Wing by this point, didn't he?
We couldn't go a full episode without a Mr. Wing nod here, but yes, he's more bird than man, I would say. Then of course you have pretty much the star of the entire Kingdom Come run, and that being a character that was then translated over into multiple different series after that, and that being Superman, and that's the Superman with this S, new designed S that's sort of just a straight bar across his chest. He's got the gray temples, and that would become an iconic character throughout the rest of DC Comics, even after this original Kingdom Come run. And then you have Wonder Woman, who is pretty much true to her original design, a little bit different. She's wearing sort of a skirt thing as opposed to her typical bathing suit look. But what a way to come out of the box, Liam.
Yeah, you went with sort of a great all-star set, but you didn't also you didn't do all the heavy hitters, right? You saved some of the bigger ones for later versions. And it's interesting, right? Because we have the Green Lantern in his armor, we have this wild Hawkman, and then obviously, and we'll get to that in a later series, there is a Wonder Woman in her armor. But I like that they went with sort of the more classic looking Wonder Woman first, because again, I think that builds anticipation, because maybe later down the line you're going to get that iconic golden winged armor that we are hopefully sometime in the future, in the relatively near future, going to get to see on the big screen in Wonder Woman 1984. So I think, but kicking it off with sort of one of the armored heroes, but not immediately doing all of the armored versions right off the bat, I think was a really smart move. And that brought us into Series 2, which is also released in 2003, which did in fact have the iconic Kingdom Come look of Batman. You also had a Kid Flash released, the Red Robin, which in that comic series it was Dick Grayson behind the mask, and then of course a Shazam. So really, again, you saved Batman for Series 2, and then you gave someone like Hawkman or maybe a different Wonder Woman that was expected time to shine in that first series, but then coming right behind it with another couple of heavy hitters, and certainly in Batman and Shazam.
Yeah, and I think it appears that it'd be curious to pick the brain sometime of the guys that were in charge, or the guys or gals that were in charge of sort of the layouts of these series. But it's very obvious, it seems to me, that first line you have one armored guy, and then you got three standard characters. Series 2, you got Batman in his heavy duty armor. Again, there's some sort of budget constraint probably in that also, thinking about the way that things are set up. More money's being poured into that Batman because you have different parts on it. The wings move, and it's a bulky figure as it is. Also an iconic look, as you mentioned. Just stands out. Toyetic is the word that that the collector community likes to use. That series is straight up very toyetic. And then you have Kid Flash, who is Kid Flash. It's an iconic character sort of in itself, but stands out in this just because it's Kid Flash. And then, like you said, Red Robin. This is a creation that again translated past this Kingdom Come later on in the DC universe proper. Of course, Tim Drake eventually takes on that mantle of Red Robin, so another character that was later on incorporated into the standard continuity. And then Shazam. I think of all the Shazam figures that DC Direct ever did, I think this is the one. And even though the articulation on some of these early figures, a lot of collectors care more about articulation than anything because of the way that you want to pose guys. So some of these earlier series of DC Direct figures were more akin to a statue because there wasn't as much mobility for figures. Arms and legs, you may have 4 or 5 points of articulation. Arms and legs may be able to move, but you don't have the range of motion or the double jointed elbows or double jointed ankle rockers or the things that a lot of nowadays that collectors are more demanding of. But this Shazam, while he is sort of more of a statuesque figure, he has his hands on his hips. It looks directly taken out of one of the most famous panels in the Kingdom Come series. And I think this is the best Shazam / Captain Marvel figure that DC Direct produced in their entire run.
Yeah, that's such an iconic part of that series. Is obviously there's sort of two groups of the heroes, one led by Batman, one led by Superman, are sort of pitted against each other. And the fight between Superman and Captain Marvel / Shazam, and Captain Marvel has this really again, it's very a weird throwback but modernized, where he's got sort of still has the squint and the big goofy smile for a lot of it of the series, and it really but obviously done in the hyper real style of Alex Ross, and they really brought that to the figure as well. As that fight between Superman and Shazam / Captain Marvel in that book is such a memorable part of that book to me. And that's I think the figure, the likeness, the bringing that image of Alex Ross's vision of Shazam to life there is really well done. And that will bring us to the third series, which came out in 2004, which featured a Red Arrow, the villain, the main villain of the piece, Magog, finally getting in there. We also have a Deadman who is sort of part of the sort of narration of it. And then we have the Flash, who has sort of become this ultimate being of speed. He has the Jay Garrick helmet, but he's sort of a couple of the different incarnations of Flashes sort of combined into one. And then we also, finally, we get the armored Wonder Woman. As you pointed out, Cal, it seems like we had one sort of big armored figure per set here. And here in the final series of the Kingdom Come run, they still had some heavy hitters. And this is a pretty good set. I think the Wonder Woman certainly stands out again because that golden armor with the wings, as we mentioned, is so iconic. That's sort of the standout for me. But I always really love that Flash look, too.
Yeah, the Flash is sort of like you said, a marrying of a couple different. It looks more like your standard Jay Garrick with the Hermes helmet, and it's the figure itself is a translucent red because he was sort of this vibrating, moving looking character throughout the entire through the entire actual Kingdom Come book. But it's another figure that we would use the word toyetic. I think Deadman has a good look also because in the comic, correct me if I'm wrong, but he's more of a skeletal looking character than your typical man in a circus outfit. So again, there's certain things that were more visually interesting in the book that then translated to action figure. It's like, man, this is really looks really cool sitting on a shelf there. But I would say obviously the obvious ones to go through in each of these series, the standouts would be the armored figures, just because they look cool sitting on a shelf. But you can't go wrong with whether it's the Shazam, I think the Superman from series 1, I think the Shazam from series 2, and then the Flash from series 3 are also visually great standouts as well for your standard figures.
Agreed. Yeah, I think the armored ones are all pretty special, and like I said, I have a special affection for that Red Robin suit, again, because it was later used by, I think every Robin except Damian has put that suit on, at least for a couple issues. So it's sort of obviously had a life well after this series, but this is the introduction of that suit, and it's got the very classic, it has sort of the Burt Ward black and yellow belt on it. So it sort of has the flares on the tunic that go down under the belt. So it sort of still has that classic 1940s Robin feel to it, but then it's him wrapped up in this black cape and the full cowl. It's a really, really striking look. So that Red Robin always stuck out for me, in addition to the ones we've already mentioned. But that will move us on to the Justice line of Alex Ross figures. And Cal, I don't think we're going to be able to go through every single one of these lines one by one because there are just so many. But starting out with a very strong Series 1, I will name these very quickly. We started out in this Justice line with a Superman, which had a variant with sort of an angrier look and red eyes indicating his heat vision. Sinestro, Cheetah, Bizarro, and Flash. And so that this is a very villain-heavy first line.
Yeah, and that was something that I thought was unique about this line is that, you had some of these other characters, and granted, they were not in your sort of standard comic book look. There are these aged versions of these heroes from Series 1, but from Kingdom Come, but here, right off the bat for the Justice series, which we said this is one of those series that ended up getting, because I think it was so popular and because there were so many characters used in that actual series. There's 8 different series of DC Direct figures that, and that doesn't count box sets and re-releases and all that stuff, as we said. But starting out with a lot of villains, and that's something else that you look at your standard figures in a box store that are put out by Mattel, and one of the major complaints about McFarlane thus far has been that it's been so Batman heavy. There have been so many different Batman already in just the first 3 or 4 years released. Part of that is definitely because your box stores want a recognizable figure on a shelf, and that being they right. Still see that as Batman or Superman, typically Batman first. So here you have the option, because you're going to these collector stores, of getting a Cheetah, a Sinestro, and Bizarro in your very first series. It's like that would generally be unheard of. Even in the Mattel DC Universe Classics, those were figures that were released far later on in the series, when they sort of built up enough goodwill with retailers. So starting off right off the bat with these more lifelike, realistic 3D versions of the Alex Ross paintings, really, really strong. And like you said, definitely unique and something that DC Direct was able to take advantage of.
Absolutely, and this series, as you said, went for so long, and because of the direction the story took, we got to see sort of the regular versions of a lot of these characters, your Supermans, your Batmans, your Green Lanterns, and then later on down the line in the series, starting with Series 6 in 2007, we began to see the armored versions that sort of pop up towards the end of that story. And you have, again, completely different types of armor than what we saw in the Kingdom Come series. But we have an armored Batman, an armored Green Lantern, an armored Aquaman, and eventually an armored Superman. And those are, I think, some of the other standout characters, or some of the standout figures of this massive Justice line, where, again, you had pretty much every character under the sun and tons of villains. But I think those armored versions, specifically the armored Batman, which sort of has this motif very reminiscent of and a color scheme very reminiscent of the 1966 Adam West Batmobile. Those armored versions of the heroes are kind of what stick out to me when I think of this Justice line.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine this series being complete without those versions of the characters, just because they're so iconic. I think there was a missed opportunity to maybe keep this series going, and again, I don't know. It's hard to know what decisions were made in deciding, hey, 8 is going to be the final series for these figures, just because a lot of the heroes ended up using these sort of armored versions of themselves, almost perpetuating lines almost unending, based on, you could have done, a Plastic Man in his armor. You could have done, a big gaping hole is the fact that they didn't get to a second armored Wonder Woman who has a different armored version.
Agreed.
In the graphic novel. So, there was some misses there. With that said, I went out recently and purchased the armored Aquaman, because that was the only one that I didn't have from the set, and it doesn't feel incomplete having those four sitting on a shelf. I think that certainly stand out and are visually, were basically designed to be action figures. I don't know if Alex Ross thought when he was writing, hey, these are going to be great action figures one day, but they translated very well into 3D. I think that Batman may be one of my favorite Batman produced by DC Comics of all time. It's just so great. It has a giant wingspan. Like you said, the coloration invoking the 1966 Batmobile was a brilliant design decision from Mr. Ross, and then being able to translate it with a shine on it and really getting it into that 3D form is really great. I also think that the Superman is a little bit underrated. You have the Christopher Reeve 1979 Superman S emblazoned on full armor. Like, how do you put Superman in a full armor suit and still have him be Superman? There's some steel, I would say, invocations there, and then
agreed.
You have a lot of in his designs. What Mr. Ross did was include these things from his childhood or things that he remembered in growing up, and invoking not only the 60s Batman, but then the Christopher Reeve Superman S into his design there was really, really strong. So I'd say that those 4 armored figures stick out. The rest of the series certainly is great, and having 3D versions of Mr. Ross's artwork, but the 4 armored figures certainly for me are the standouts.
Agreed. Yeah, the only other one I really wanted to touch on here is I was gifted, I believe, for Christmas one year the Brainiac figure from that set, and it's not really like a great kid's toy, but I appreciate it a lot more now as an adult who still collects these things. It's him. There's a very memorable scene where he's performing some brain surgery, and in that graphic novel, and so he's in sort of this white smock, and he has the figure comes with a scalpel and a literal human brain, and then the deco on the figure is very well done. The paint is very well done. Like, sort of all of his fingertips are painted red, as if he's been performing surgery, and it's like this all white outfit with just the sort of classic green Super Friends Brainiac looking head, and then he's like they sort of recast this sinister surgeon in this iconic scene, and then recreated in the figure. But that one always had sort of a special place in my heart, I think, especially as I got older and learned to appreciate it more.
For sure.
And that will bring us to our final Alex Ross inspired line, that being the Justice Society of America line. He did quite a few covers for that series, and then started doing a little bit of interiors as well. They actually did a storyline which involved bringing some of the Kingdom Come characters into the proper DC universe, and sort of dealing, and sort of how the Justice Society was dealing with that. So we had just 2 sets of these, which came out in 2009 and 2010 respectively. But we had a first set of Starman, Sandman, a Golden Age Green Lantern, that being Alan Scott, Golden Age Flash, of course, being Jay Garrick. That was Series 1. And then Series 2, we have Cyclone, Hourman, a new version of the Kingdom Come Superman, and, of course, Stargirl. So a good mishmash of some of that era of JSA was sort of the idea is you still have the old classic, like, World War II era heroes, but you're also mishmashing it with some of the newer, younger characters that had been introduced in the book at the time, and then also melding that with some of the Kingdom Come stuff. It's not as massive, obviously, as either of the other 2 lines, or maybe not as iconic as far as Alex Ross's work goes, but it's still a very memorable series.
Yeah, I think that it does something that we'll probably talk about in our next artist spotlight, and that is that it fills out some of those characters that maybe didn't get figures in the Justice line. You still get them in the Alex Ross style, so it allows you to fill out, if you have a shelf that you're displaying your Justice figures on, you can fill in some of the holes and not it doesn't look out of place. They're done obviously in the same scale, and it's the same artist style. So it allows you to kind of fill out your roster as you complete that, and it allows allows you, like you said, to commemorate a fairly memorable run of Justice Society comics. So this series, I don't have a strong love or a lot of memories for these two particular Justice Society series, but I think it was important to highlight it because it went beyond just the two miniseries that Mr. Ross did initially, and then it allows you to do what so many of the other series end up sort of falling short on, and that is filling out a roster of figures in the same artist style.
Agreed. I think, yeah, like I said, I think it's cool, even though it's probably not his most memorable idea. But like, yeah, it's really cool that we have a Stargirl in an Alex Ross style, or an Hourman, some of those guys. So it's a great set to finish out, even though, like I said, it's based on sort of less iconic fare than some of the other Alex Ross stuff.
All right, Liam, and that will take us to our next artist spotlight here. One of our personal favorites growing up, and to me, again, I think we're going to guffaw over all of the artists that we're spotlighting here, but it's hard to think of a more influential artist for me than Ed McGuinness, who we'll be discussing next, and different lines that they covered as far as his art is concerned. Very, very different artwork, obviously different art style than Alex Ross. Alex Ross, obviously paintings based in realism. Ed McGuinness is probably the polar opposite as far as he just designs massive, over-exaggerated superheroes.
Absolutely. I remember when they were adapting the Superman Batman Public Enemies storyline into a animated feature. I remember Bruce Timm saying at the time that it's kind of like Ed McGuinness' style is kind of like you took the Bruce Timm style, the DCAU style, and just injected everyone with a lot of steroids. And so it has a very cartoony, like over the top superheroic quality to it, but there's a little bit more definition, a little more muscle. Even I think that's something I appreciate is even in his female characters, like they're very well like they're very muscular. There's very like everyone has a very like muscular, athletic build to them. And especially sort of the tip top heroes, the Supermans and Batman of these lines. Such giant gargantuan feats in the comics, just big giant muscle men, and that really is reflected almost quite perfectly in this series of DC Direct lines based on Ed McGuinness's artwork.
Yeah, for sure. And, so the first ever line that they actually based his artwork off of, Liam, is one of my favorite comic book runs of all time. And that was the launch of the Superman Batman comics in early 2004, I believe. And then in 2005, they launched the first series of Superman Batman action figures. This was a Superman Batman based on the comic line series. So for that, there was the first arc, which was Public Enemies, which was based on Mr. McGuinness's artwork, and then they took a break, and they believe they did the Michael Turner line, the last daughter of Krypton, or whatever line that was. And then they moved back into when Ed McGuinness came back to do the next line, which was the Vengeance line. So we'll jump around a little bit here within that Superman Batman line. But we start out with the DC Direct Public Enemies line from 2005. And that had a lineup of Batman, Captain Atom, Metallo, Shazam, Superman, and then there was, at the time, the Toy Fair magazine. There was a Toy Fair magazine exclusive, which was a mail-away Superman as Shazam figure. So, yes, kids, there was, at the time, a print publication where you went to get all of your toy news. The internet was not as readily available as it was today. You went there, and not only was there a print form of this toy news, but they also offered an exclusive action figure through this magazine. So that makes this line a little bit memorable. Liam, what stands out for you for Public Enemies Series 1?
I think it's mostly just how much they nailed the Ed McGuinness style. Like, these figures are pretty darn perfect recreations. We talked about that with Alex Ross, about how they had the artists work on these. Obviously, there's a million sort of great panels you can take from, but sort of having the artists come in and work with their teams on creating these 3D images, and then having incredible sculptors work on actually bringing these characters into sort of three-dimensional action figure life. But the standout figure of that first series to me is unquestionably, just because of how intricate it is that Metallo figure.
Yeah, he's unique from the series. It seems that a lot of the figures, because they're the standard male body type, that a lot of them use a very similar stance. And again, this is a 5 points of articulation line for the majority of it. Just arms bend, shoulders move, knees and legs move, head turns. So I guess that's more like 7 or 8 points of articulation, but very limited movement here. But that Metallo is in a dynamic stance. The character design is similar to that which we see in the DCAU, more of the human John Corbin-esque, but he has a giant shovel for an arm, Liam.
Yes, it's really, really intricate, some of the stuff they do. Yeah, he has sort of this one arm is sort of this small, very skeleton-like robot arm. He has this giant shovel, which of course is very memorable of the scene in the book where he, after shooting Superman with a kryptonite bullet, buries him and Batman alive, using this giant shovel that he can transform his arm into. He also has a removable, like, human, as you mentioned, John Corbin face, which comes off and reveals sort of the skeleton underneath, and even has like a removable chest plate and a removable kryptonite heart underneath it. So it's so intricate, and so many little details, like the paint, like there's like dirt on his shoes that's sort of like there's like a dusting of dirt and gravel on his pants and his boots. Like, it's really, really intricately done. And yeah, I guess maybe they were able to save some money by using such a similar male body type for most of the figures. So it feels like a lot of that extra the extra money they had left over, the ability to work in just completely new parts. And again, it's not like there's a lot of reuse available, and obviously this is a little bit different than what you would make for a mass market toy, as we've talked about. But yeah, it's just a completely new thing. His giant shovel arm, his removable face, and his his removable kryptonite heart. It's such a standout figure of this set to me.
I would agree. I think that it's nice to finally have the Superman in Ed McGuinness style, because to me, I think that is such a throwback to that era, that early 2000s era. For me, when I think Superman, he did so many iconic covers for Superman in Action Comics during his run there, that's just something nice to have in 3D form. But I think you're right. I think having something that was just such a unique look to it, and such a standout version of a character that was sort of grossly underused and underproduced at that time. Again, you're not getting a whole lot of, you had a Metallo figure from the animated series, Superman the animated series from Hasbro, but you're not getting a lot of Metallo figures made, especially in this very unique sort of Transformer type style with a shovel for an arm. So I would agree. Jumping down now, Liam, as we said, Series 2 was based on Michael Turner's art from the Superman Batman series. So we're going down to Series 3, which is Series 2 of the Public Enemies versions of the figures. And that included another strong lineup. And again, this storyline has a vast array of important DC characters, a lot of the Bat family used in this one. So we get not only Steel, who was John Henry Irons' niece, Natasha Irons, at the time. So we have a female Steel. We also get Hawkman, who we can talk about in a second. So a couple issues that I have with Hawkman. But then you have absolutely massive armored Lex Luthor in his super friend style / superpower style armor. We get future Superman, who is Kingdom Come Superman, ironically. And then rounding out the order, we have Nightwing. So another heavy, literally heavy, as when it comes to the armored Lex figure, just a massive figure. You could kill a man with that figure. But armored Lex comes with an alternate head. What stands out for this series for you?
Definitely, I think the two that would stand out for me is that armored Lex you mentioned. That was, I mean, to the whole sort of comic book world at the time, the DC comic book world, that was a big deal, because at the time Lex Luthor was the president in all the books. Like, in the main continuity, he had been elected president. And this was sort of the story that kicked off these first 6 issues of the Superman Batman comic book. Did this story about how basically Batman and Superman go on this adventure, which leads to sort of the downfall of the Lex Luthor administration, and leads to him sort of getting crazier and crazier, and he's injecting himself with weird like kryptonite steroids the whole time, and finally he just goes completely off the deep end and puts on, as you mentioned, sort of an armor very reminiscent of that superpowers Lex Luthor armor, and decides he's going to fight. He's going to fight Superman in the middle of Metropolis, and it's a wild ending to that book, and it's so iconic. And the fact that they went to the Armored Lex, which again, it's a heavy, wild, expensive to produce figure, was kind of impressive. But yeah, that's definitely the one that stands out. And just because we are such big Batman and Batman family character fans, it was really cool to see a Nightwing in this set as well. It's a pretty memorable issue where sort of the Batman and Superman families break into the White House thinking that Batman and Superman have been captured, and sort of them interacting with Lex Luthor, specifically Nightwing's interactions with Lex in that issue are very memorable. So it was definitely cool to see those two, but I know you have a bone to pick with this Hawkman, so I'm going to let you talk about that.
So as we mentioned, a lot of the figures do share similar style or similar molding. I think there's definitely some variations on the molding, but they generally share the same Buck style, which I assume led them to create the vast amount of characters that they end up creating for this style. But one swing and a miss comes from this Hawkman, Liam, because he is a massive figure. He's like, I would say, looking at him, he's at least an inch taller than everybody else. And ironically, in the storyline, it's Batman is the one who dresses up like Hawkman, disguises himself as Hawkman. I think Hawkman himself does make an appearance briefly, but regardless, he's clearly should have been in the same scale as the other figures, and instead, for some reason, he's this massive, gigantic creature. And it unfortunately just stands out. He's about a head and a half taller than most of the other figures, so he rests in the back of my Ed McGuinness display.
Kind of has to, right? Or you wouldn't be able to see most of the other figures.
Yeah, that's true. Also, his wings don't stay in his back, which is another thing that we can talk about. And his arm falls off, because that's a lot of problems, unfortunately, that we'll talk a lot about what we loved about the DC Direct line. With that said, that it certainly is not without its flaws. They had a lot of production issues where it seems like if you 1 out of every 3 DC Direct figures had an arm that would just snap off. You could pop it back in the socket, but it didn't stay there because there's a little plastic peg that kept it connected to everything. So my Hawkman has the arm fall off problem. So every now and then I look into my display and he's just one-armed. But that's my bone to pick with this, is that Hawkman completely and totally out of scale and sort of ruins what would have been a pretty good action figure otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's fair. There's sort of a very iconic moment where Batman and Superman are fighting Captain Marvel / Shazam and Hawkman in the snow. And it appears that Shazam and Hawkman get the better of them, and which leads to, as we already mentioned, there's a Toy Fair exclusive where Superman goes to the White House dressed as Captain Marvel, and as he grabs Luthor by the lapels, Luthor tears the Captain Marvel suit, and you see the Superman S underneath it. Meanwhile, Batman is dressed as Hawkman, and he's gone in to free, I believe, Superboy and somebody who are trapped. So in this Hawkman outfit. And so you would think, well, based on that, Hawkman would need to be the same size as Batman. But nope. But I guess based on how massive they wanted to make the wings, they're like, nope, we need a bigger figure just to support these. And
possibly.
Yeah. But yeah, that's definitely a swing and a miss on this set. But
I will say, by the way, I didn't mention it, but that Series 1 Toy Fair exclusive Superman as Shazam is pretty darn cool also. The fact that they went to the lengths that they did to make it was as simple as popping a Superman head on a Shazam. You could have just done a Superman head on a Shazam body, but they went the extra mile and having the suit sort of torn away with the Superman logo underneath. I thought that was really, really, really innovative and a great variant and sort of chase figure for collectors to search for. It's a good one to look up if you're collected these and haven't seen it. You can probably I'm sure you can find it on eBay. It's not too expensive, so definitely a cool one to add to the collection.
Agreed.
All right, Liam, moving on to Series 4 of Superman Batman action figures, continuing here with the Ed McGuinness style. So we move on to the next storyline, which was the Vengeance storyline. So we have some new characters that were introduced into that, and thankfully they made them in the Ed McGuinness classic style. We got Batman Beyond, Batwoman, Bizarro, Bat-Zarro. We have a kryptonite version of Batman, and we get Superwoman. So there's some alternate timelines that are involved in this storyline. There's, I thought that the character selection for this one was a little bit strange overall. Maybe would have selected a couple different characters, maybe from the original line, as opposed to producing a Batwoman and a Superwoman figure, especially since I think they left out the Superboy from that set also, if you were going to complete the trifecta there. But regardless, you have these different characters from this set that were created. I think for me, the standout has to be Batman Beyond.
Oh, for sure. And I know there's some debate because they apparently mistakenly this Batman Beyond is referred to as Tim in the issue where he debuts, and I think that even made it onto the back of the packaging that Batman Beyond is Tim Drake in this figure. So I've often debated on whether or not I need that for my ever-growing Tim Drake collection, if I need to count that or not, because apparently it was just an editorial, like a mistake that wasn't caught by the editors in time. I think it may have been updated for trades later on, or at least the name was taken out. I don't know if they changed it to Terry or not, but yeah, so I have often tortured myself thinking about whether or not I need to count this Ed McGuinness Batman Beyond for my Tim Drake set. Because, and again, ironically, later on, there was a Batman Beyond comic series where Tim Drake became Batman in Batman Beyond time, which they never made a figure for. So I'm like, would this count as a Batman Beyond Tim Drake? It tortures me. I lay awake at night thinking about it. But it is a cool figure.
Yeah, it's a standout. It's pretty cool. It was awesome to see, obviously, a character that was so near and dear to us as DCAU fans make it into main continuity, even if it isn't or is or might be or indeterminate whether or not it's whether it is Terry or Tim, but still having the Batman Beyond costume and character in Ed McGuinness style is so great. The rest of this set, I think the only other one that I would mention standing out just because of the iconic nature and from his original run on some of the Superman comics would be the Bizarro figure. To me, I think Ed McGuinness's Bizarro, when I think of Bizarro, I think it's that as the standard bearer for all Bizarro designs.
Yeah, it's just this big, goofy, smiling guy with his number one necklace around his neck. It's so iconic, especially some of those Superman like Emperor Joker comic covers that Ed McGuinness did. It's really, really reminiscent of a lot of those. And that is, I would agree. I think that's the Bizarro at least as far as comic book versions go for me.
There you go. And then wrapping up, Liam, we're moving on to our final series here, which would be Vengeance Series 2. This is in 2008, Series 5, technically, of the Superman Batman action figure set. So we have composite Superman. We have the Joker and Mr. Mixie Spitlick in a 2-pack. We have Power Girl, and then we have Supergirl as well. Let's talk about this set briefly, Liam. Only 4 figures in this set compared to some of the other ones that had a larger roster, so it feels like they're kind of running out of characters to cover for this specific series here. Anything stand out for you in this one?
Well, to me, the standout is Power Girl because she seems like a big gaping hole in the Public Enemies line.
Yeah,
for sure. She's a pretty important part of that. So the fact that feels, because I know she does appear briefly in this Vengeance story, because there's a part where like all of the Supergirls of various times and universes go to save Superman, who's been trapped in the Source Wall. But certainly the more, her more memorable role in this Superman Batman comic series was in the Public Enemies storyline, where she's initially part of this Lex Luthor sanctioned sort of pseudo Justice League involving Captain Atom and some of those other people that made it into the lines. And then she sort of eventually has a change of heart and helps Superman and Batman sort of save the day near the end. So I think she's the standout just because she was a missed one in these first two lines that were based on Public Enemies. But yeah, and I do have some affection for that Joker and Mixie Spitlick set too, just because it was kind of cool to get. Again, that's more, even though they were in that Vengeance story together, it feels like that's more reminiscent of the Emperor Joker storyline from the early 2000s, where Joker steals Mixie Spitlick's powers and sort of warps the world. So it was kind of cool to see those. But that last line sort of feels more like we're just rounding it out. We're calling it part of the Vengeance line, but it's more just about rounding out some of those sort of obvious holes in an Ed McGuinness line.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. That's a perfect way of putting it. And I think it's a good segue as we cover the second line, or the sort of the subsequent line that they did for Ed McGuinness style. So after the initial Batman Superman line, they actually did in 2006 a DC Direct Justice League Classified, which I believe is based on a couple of the covers that Ed McGuinness did of the Justice League that sort of filled out the original Justice League roster. So from that, you had a Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, Aquaman, Flash, and Martian Manhunter. And then in 2009, I guess based on sort of the popularity of those Batman Superman lines, so this would have been directly after the Vengeance line, you had subsequent a separate JLA classified Ed McGuinness line that saw re-release of a couple of the other figures with different paint schemes. But this, Liam, allowed them to sort of expand a little bit more on some of those characters, those classic characters, and also incorporate some characters that maybe Mr. McGuinness had either drawn in some of that JLA classified line, or just getting more visually interesting characters in this Ed McGuinness style, since you already have those sort of basic bucks that you're kind of sharing all the bodies with.
Yeah, it's a cool era. There's certainly some variation there. You have sort of just your classics like your Flashes and Wonder Womans, but you also get a John Stewart Green Lantern and a Kyle Rayner Green Lantern across these series. You get a couple different versions of Aquaman. You get the classic Lightning, Superman Blue and Red releases. Seeing Ed McGuinness's take on that sort of very unique but visually memorable time in Superman's history is cool. So yeah, there's definitely some standouts, but yeah, it does feel like less about sort of recreating specific iconic moments of his art and sort of what we were talking about towards the end of that Alex Ross line, where it's more just about, well, who haven't we made in that style yet? Yeah,
they did a great job. I think it's fun. Like I said, it's another case, just as like we mentioned with Alex Ross's the Justice Society line, is that this sort of allows you to fill in some of those holes, some characters that may or may not have been included in that Batman Vengeance line. For instance, you get a Cassandra Cain Batgirl who was featured in the Public Enemies storyline but didn't get a figure. You get Wonder Woman, you get the Flash, so you round out some of the Justice League roster, and then seeing some of these other classic, the 90s classic Kyle Rayner design, which I know you and I have such a fondness for.
Yes.
That costume, that character. So seeing him, being able to put him on the same shelf as your other Ed McGuinness figures, I think was really great. It's really fun, and really I felt like that's another one of those series that could have gone on a lot further than it did. They ended up doing 3 different series from 2009 to 2010 in that JLA classified. I don't think there's necessarily a gaping hole of a character, maybe one that we'll mention when we get to the end of the episode, but overall it's certainly an interesting look. I think them using similar bodies for a lot of the characters, or at least a similar mold, I think helps it sort of uniform out and sort of it's a great display. I'm a little bit partial to it just because of my love for his style, but I think it really displays really well.
Agreed. Yeah, and Cassandra Cain Batgirl is not a character who got a lot of toys across any lines, or her that Batgirl series. It's funny now because we sort of at a certain point, DC made a decision that we're going to go back to all sort of the classic versions that the layman, the person that hasn't watched, maybe has never read a comic, but sort of knows from the cartoons or a movie or whatever, we're going to use those versions. So they sort of, for a time at least, erased Cassandra Cain from existence. And so I think for people who were in it at the time, I mean, she was Batgirl from when she's introduced in the No Man's Land series in the late 90s all the way through to sort of like 2007 or 2008 when they sort of went in a different direction with it. But yeah, there aren't a lot of Cassandra Cain toys out there, so the idea that she made it into this sort of very iconic Ed McGuinness line, I love it. I love that she was able to make the cut for that line. So and yeah, as you've already mentioned, the Kyle Rayner is also a standout for that line.
For sure. And for you collectors that are checking this episode out, if you're looking to do a full collection of Ed McGuinness figures, that save your pennies for that Cassandra Cain figure, as Liam mentioned. I think some of it has to do with the fact that there were so few versions of that character made. But man, getting your hands on any version of a Cassandra Cain figure, whether it's the Mattel version from the DC Superheroes line or the first appearance version or this version, I don't know how many additional versions of Cassandra Cain there are. That might be it. But save your pennies for that, because they are not cheap figures.
Yeah, it's great advice there. And that will move us on, Cal, to our third sort of artist-inspired series, that being 2004 and 2005's Mike McKone Contemporary Teen Titans toy line, which has sort of a very special place in my heart, because I think that 2003 relaunch of the Teen Titans, sort of spinning out of the end of the Young Justice book and the ending of the Adult Titans book that had been around, they sort of got it back to basics. It's sort of based a little bit on the team that existed in the Teen Titans cartoon, but it's sort of the modern version. So it was just a brand new start with Jeff Johns writing and Mike McKone's art. And there's some really, really standout figures in. Unfortunately, we only got 2 sets of it, so we didn't get to kind of flesh out the entire Titans team that I would have liked to have seen. I really wish there was a Cyborg and a Starfire, but of course there was also a line of the new Teen Titans figures based on the art of George Perez going on around this time, and I think they didn't want to do 2 Cyborgs and 2 Starfires and 2 Beast Boys, so we're kind of left with, you have your modern takes on Wonder Girl, the Cassandra Sandsmark, a Tim Drake Robin, and the Connor Kent Superboy, as well as a Bart Allen Kid Flash. But while this line is incomplete, we still got some pretty strong figures. To me, the series, as I mentioned, the first series was that Wonder Girl Robin, a Blackfire, and a Deathstroke the Terminator. And then series 2 in 2005 had that Connor Kent Superboy, Kid Flash, Brother Blood, and Deathstroke's daughter, the Ravager. So it's a smaller set, only 8 figures to talk about, but it's iconic to me because the comics they're based on meant so much to me. And I really think that Deathstroke and that Robin specifically really stand out to me from this set.
Yeah, talk about, we mentioned at the very tail end of our Ed McGuinness line about the Cassandra Cain being so collectible. This is another one of those series where I don't know if it was because of the production, the popularity of these characters, like you said, if they underproduced this because of the other ongoing Teen Titans figure series at the time, but this is a series where a lot of the figures are hard to come by, and if you do find them, they're not going to be cheap to get, Liam. Especially Deathstroke is another one of those characters. I don't know what it is about him, but each and every figure that is produced of this character seems to multiply in value very quickly. It's I guess just because of the type of character it is, the popularity of them, and the fact that there haven't been a lot of figures produced, certainly more than Cassandra Cain, certainly more than definitely not more than Tim Drake though. But that said, this is a series, again, based on a specific artist that stands out because it's from that era, from that certain era, the early 2000s era. And it's a great roster. You look at it, you get Robin and Superboy anchoring both of your lines there, but you also get Kid Flash, Bart Allen, who is only Kid Flash for a short period of time, so that captures that look. So if you're looking to complete your let's just say you want to get every version of Flash that there's ever been, well, here's a Bart Allen Kid Flash figure. I don't know how many Bart Allen Kid Flashes that they produced at DC Direct, but I can imagine that since he was only Kid Flash for a period of time, that it's not very many. And then you have Wonder Girl and Blackfire. I think there's only a few Blackfire. There may be one in the Justice line, but I think this may be the only other Blackfire figure that they ever produced. And then you have just toyetic characters like Brother Blood and the ever popular Connor Kent Superboy. I mean, it's just it's just Superboy in a t-shirt and jeans, but for whatever reason, that character is very toyetic and was very prominent in that costume in the early 2000s. So another very popular character, very popular look, very very popular one for cosplay artists as well.
Oh, for sure. It's a pretty easy look to put together, but I do think this line coming in 2005, which was also the year the Infinite Crisis series came out that killed the Connor Kent Superboy, I think that also maybe drove the scarcity of that Superboy figure. We talked about a lot of the figures in this set are hard to come by, and that Superboy is right up near the top of the list as far as, finding it for a decent price at least. So, yeah, I think getting that sort of one version of it, which is somehow, as you said, despite the simplicity of the look, is somehow just as iconic as his leather jacket and sunglasses look from the 90s. So, yeah, that's like I said, it's a much smaller entry than most of our other ones on this list, but definitely one that held a special place in my heart.
For sure. All right, Liam, we are nearing the end. I think we got we are halfway home actually. Here, our next line that we're going to cover is another one of our heavy hitters here, and that is going to be the Jim Lee inspired Hush line, which again, Liam, we've gotten to talk about a bunch of very important artists, certainly a bunch of iconic DC Direct lines, but another one of those that stands out as maybe 1 or 1A of the most important, best looking lines of all time, and some of it certainly has to do with the graphic novel success and importance at that time, but the Jim Lee Hush line is another, just, man, I think every series that they did just is a home run.
Oh, agreed, absolutely. That's such an iconic line that, as you mentioned, it's a great story the way it's laid out. A lot of the stories that we're talking about were written by Jeff Loeb, and the way that story is written out is it's very much a sort of a journey through the world of Batman. Obviously, at the heart of it is this new villain Hush, who's sort of stalking him, and then you have this underlying plot of this budding sort of, this is like the most serious romance he's ever had with Catwoman. So those are kind of the two main points, but then it's those two stories are sort of told over this long, 12-issue stories over a year of the books. But in the midst of it, he goes to Metropolis and he fights Superman, who's been brainwashed by Poison Ivy. We have, we see the Joker, we see Catwoman and Harley Quinn, and he teams up with Nightwing to stop the Riddler, and of course, the Huntress is a big character in it, and she has this confrontation with the Scarecrow later in the book, and so many iconic characters, and seeing Jim Lee's versions of all those characters in the books, and then in turn seeing them all brought to life by these figures is it's as we said, there's very few misses, if any, in this set. It's a lot of strong contact, a lot of home runs.
Yeah, so believe it or not, Liam, I would have thought this was another set that had maybe 5, 6, 7 series, but they only made 3 series from Hush, and they pretty much got each character that they could out of it, with the exception of a few notable exceptions that we'll probably talk about it a little bit later. But Series 1 had Batman, Huntress, Hush, Joker, Poison Ivy, and the iconic Toy Fair exclusive, another Toy Fair magazine exclusive Jason Todd mail-away figure. Mm-hmm. Those were came out in 2004. Also in 2004 was Series 2, Catwoman, Harley Quinn, Nightwing, Riddler, Superman. And then also so starting in 2005 was the final series that had Alfred, Commissioner Gordon, Ra's al Ghul, Scarecrow, and then a variant stealth jumper Batman in his stealth jumping costume. So we have 2 Batmen in this series. We have a Superman that gets in there. We get Nightwing is probably, I guess, between Nightwing and the Hush Jason Todd. I think those 2 are the standouts for me. And I think despite my love for the Jason Todd figure, since it's sort of just a variant of that Hush, I think that my standout has to go to that Nightwing figure, just being it's such and perfectly as a heterosexual male happy to admit it's just a beautiful action figure. Like Nightwing, Jim Lee draws a beautiful man in Nightwing. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Absolutely. And I think Jim Lee's Nightwing has been recreated. I mean, we said we weren't going to talk much about the other DC Direct products, but there is a black and white version of the Jim Lee Nightwing. There's a colored version of it that came out more recently. This sort of classic Jim Lee look of Nightwings has been, specifically, there's a sort of at the back of the graphic novels is this giant poster he made of sort of all the heroes standing together, and there's Nightwing kind of standing while he's twirling one of his sticks, and it's such an iconic image. Yeah, I think there's going to be some debate there, and certainly George Perez in the original like disco era of Nightwing, or some of those Ed Brubaker, some of the great artists that took their turns on Nightwing over the years. But man, if Jim Lee isn't near the top, and I guess that's easy to say with most characters, but especially with, I think, his Nightwing, yeah, I think that's especially iconic, and them sort of recreating that in figure form here, it was just perfect. I also really love his Harley Quinn, the way for whatever reason, just the way he drew like the what do you call those things on her mask?
Like the Harlequin ear, like the ears,
the Harlequin
like the
ears, where her pigtails go,
yeah,
with the little pom poms on the edge of them. Instead of sort of having them up like most artists, and obviously the classic Bruce Timm design, he sort of had them drooping down and sort of just hanging by her face, and that sort of recreated really effectively in the figure there. And the Joker, it's interesting because the Joker plays a very minor role in this story. He's really only in one issue. But they basically make him in this pose where it appears he has killed Bruce Wayne's longtime childhood friend, Tommy Elliott. And it's sort of him standing there crouched with the gun, with the bang flag coming out of it, laughing. And on the figure, not only do they sort of you can recreate that pose, but he also has a movable jaw, so you can sort of decide whether you want to pose him just grinning, or if you want to have the mouth open like he's laughing, like he is in that very memorable panel. That Joker really stands out to me as well.
Yeah, I think the jaw doesn't quite work in a way that a standard you would see on a Mattel figure or a more modern day figure. They didn't quite get the jaw moving action down all the way. I appreciate the effort though for it and what they were going for. With that said, it is absolutely frustrating that figure refuses to stand up, even with a stand with a peg hole in it on my shelf. For whatever reason, that figure falls over, I think, more than any of my other Hush figures. And he's positioned next to a Harley that I got that was used, because that Harley Quinn is a very hard figure to find also. And I got a used Harley Quinn off of eBay whose joints weren't exactly super tight. So he falls over, he knocks my Harley over. It's a huge mess. So yes, I think that captures the Jim Lee Joker, and I appreciate what they were doing. It's first world problems, I guess. I guess the only other thing, Liam, that I'll highlight here is that they did in this line, because despite the fact that it was only 3 series long, you get both an Alfred figure and a Commissioner Gordon figure in this series.
Yeah, you would expect that those in a Batman line would usually end up in like series 5 or 6 if you get to them ever. So yeah, it is cool that they both were able to make it into that third line. It's a really simple, like the Ra's al Ghul figure, which is sort of reminiscent of the Neil Adams. He's just a shirtless man with a sword look of him there. And I do love that Superman as well, because that fight with where he's been brainwashed by Poison Ivy, and he sort of has like little leaves on his, like, caught around his suit.
Yep.
And
his cape is tattered. He's got a vine on his arm. He's got heat vision eyes.
Mm-hmm. And of course the stand where you can actually pose him flying. Yep. Is quite impressive as well. So yeah, that Superman's pretty great as well. Kind of, and I think there was in a later re-release. Did they do a Jim Lee Superman that didn't have the Poison Ivy stuff at some point?
Yes, they released it. I think there was a Superman box set that they released a couple different versions of. I picked that up somewhere along the way as a Lucy on eBay at some point. But yes, it didn't come. I think it didn't come with maybe I didn't get the stand with it or something like that, but it also has the ability to fly. But the cape is not tattered, and he obviously doesn't have the vines, and he has sort of more of a standard look to his face than the heat vision mind controlled version.
Nice. Yeah, that's such an iconic line. We will get to it. There is at least one very large omission in this set, but we will get to that maybe later on in this very episode. But that will move us on, Cal. As you mentioned, only 3 series for the Hush figures, the Jim Lee inspired figures. I'm moving on to another one. We've already mentioned his name a couple of times. Jeff Loeb's other sort of famous artist partner, where he created 2 of my favorite Batman stories ever told, that being The Long Halloween and Dark Victory. Only one set for each comic book series, but both lines based on the same artist, that being Tim Solly. Those books have a really special place in my heart, just because the atmosphere of those books, it's sort of set in the very early sort of, just maybe it's like Batman Year 2. It uses a lot of the same characters that were introduced in the Frank Miller Batman Year 1 story. And it's sort of this young Batman meeting some of his rogues gallery for the first time, and also sort of dealing, again, very, very ironically, also, again, dealing with sort of this budding attraction to Catwoman, but this time as sort of a young man. First, we have the Long Halloween series, which was actually created in 2006, and that is based on, we have Batman, Catwoman, the Joker, Mad Hatter, and Two-Face. And spoilers for that series, some of this was taken, I think, later on for the Dark Knight as well. Sort of the story of most of that story is about Batman working with Harvey Dent and Commissioner Gordon to sort of clean up the city. And then eventually, by the end of the story, the tragedy befalls Harvey, and he is turned into Two-Face. And there's sort of this grand mystery of this strange holiday killer who is offing various mobsters every time there's a holiday. We don't get, it's not like the other lines where we kind of get every iconic character, but certainly that Batman, that Catwoman, and I think the Two-Face really stick out to me of that first line.
Yeah, I think this story is one of those that you have a greater appreciation for. I've read through both Long Halloween and Dark Victory, that we'll talk about in just a second, the sequel, probably once or twice. But I know that this is such an important line to you in the artwork. And I remember I believe that you had, I know you definitely had some of the Dark Victory figures from this set. Mm-hmm. And I remember seeing these on comic book shelves before, and having not read the series yet in 2006, going back and looking at them, I've definitely kicked the tires on purchasing a couple of these. And knowing with my obsessive compulsive disorder that I would have to get all of them in order to feel complete, that's why I've sort of held off at this point. Because again, finding them is not hard. Collecting money to spend on them is another thing, because they're not exactly inexpensive at this point, being 14-year-old figures, almost 15 years old. But I think that they match the artwork, which is such a unique. Tim Solly's design is such a unique look, and comparing the figures, and we've talked about already putting certain art styles into 3D. You can kind of sort of translate translate certain things sometimes, and maybe you get close enough. But I think these figures do a great job, despite maybe the lack of ease. It's not as easy as a sort of a big barrel-chested, squared, muscular character, just because of the uniqueness of his artwork. But I think a lot of especially the Two-Face, I think translates very well from the artwork over to the 3D style. So I think these are great figures. Obviously, like I said, I think they have more of a place in your heart. But with that said, I can definitely appreciate the lengths that they went to adapting this such a unique style. And we have, if you haven't read this story, now would probably be a good time to go back and read it. We know that Matt Reeves, the director for the upcoming The Batman movie that we just got a preview for this past weekend, has talked about this being an influence of his. And Liam, I know there was an exciting announcement from the DC animated direct-to-video team over the weekend, also involving Long Halloween.
That's right. We're getting a full adaptation of the story, and it will be split into 2 parts, a la the Dark Knight Returns animated films that they did several years ago now, which would lead you to think that it will be a pretty direct adaptation of the story, which excites me greatly. As I said, this Long Halloween story might be, and I go back and forth, it's probably between this and Hush, honestly, as to what my single favorite Batman story is. And this one is way up there. And as you mentioned, it's not always easy to translate a more abstract artist like Tim Sali. I know we sort of talked about this off the air. Like a lot of Michael Turner was such an iconic artist for DC, and they did a lot of figures based on his work between Superman and Batman lines, between a Identity Crisis line, and some of the Justice League covers he did. And none of those figures are very good. Like
they are ugly. They are ugly figures. I'm sorry. I think that the general consensus that most collectors have is like you said, Michael Turner's art style was so unique, so iconic, and so just like a Michael Turner drawing when you look at it. But for some reason, that look was so hard to translate into a 3-dimensional action figure that looks appetizing. They all looked emaciated. They all looked alien. It was not a good result from a lot of the figures that they produced. The only other thing, Liam, that I'll mention or that I'll add is because of the influence that we've already heard that that the Long Halloween is going to play in the Batman storyline and with the upcoming direct-to-video line, these figures are only going to become more collectible and more valuable. So if you're looking to start a collection of these, or you maybe finish out one of these, I think that the time to do so would be sooner rather than later, because they're only going to go up in value the more that it's in the public eye.
Definitely. And that'll bring us to that Dark Victory series, which also came out in 2006, I believe. And that featured a sort of just a repainted Batman. The first series had him in the gray and blue, and this one brought him to the traditional black and gray. But the rest of the series was all new. We had a Commissioner Gordon sort of in SWAT gear, which is a great figure. And then also a Scarecrow, and probably my personal favorite here, a very creepy, weird-looking penguin figure tied together with the Dark Victory Tim Sali version of Robin as part of that Dark Victory story, in addition to being a sequel to the Long Halloween story, is also sort of a new take on the origins of Robin.
Yeah, this is another one of those sets. I think to me the standout is the civilian figure of Commissioner Gordon. Well, not civilian, the non-superhero / non-supervillain version of Commissioner Gordon here. As you said, he's in his police riot gear, his tactical vest, and wearing his iconic sort of Superman, or his iconic Commissioner Gordon glasses that are you can't see through the lenses, so that's very reminiscent of that art style, and just really great translation from the artwork to a 3-dimensional action figure. And again, this is a time where we're not getting the Commissioner Gordon as an action figure. I think he's someone else who we can count on one hand the amount of action figures he's ever had, more than likely. And, I think before this, maybe in the box set that they did, the Hasbro/Kenner box set from the animated series, there was a Commissioner Gordon figure release, but this may have been only his second figure overall. So just great opportunity for a collector to get a character who wasn't readily available and that is iconic in the DC lore. So great job on that figure. I think that stands out the most from that set.
Agreed. Yeah, that one certainly, and then like I said again, the Robin, just because I've always sort of gravitated to, especially the Tim Drake Robin, but really all Robins, and that's getting a version of that, and again, sort of teamed up in the 2-pack with this very weird, even like weirder and more monstrous than like the Tim Burton version of the Penguin. I like that as a 2-pack there, because they're both very small figures, and it probably would have been a tough ask even for this smaller collector's line to ask full price for one of those figures on their own. So to have that as a 2-pack was a kind of a clever way to get both of these figures made. So those are definitely the standouts from that second set for me.
There you go. All right, Liam, moving to our final artist spotlight of the day. We talked a lot about classic DC Direct lines. We've gone through some of the heavier hitters. Now we're going to move on to our final one of the day, which is going to be one of my personal favorites, which highlights a more modern take, and one of the DC Collectibles line, as DC Direct was eventually rebranded as DC Collectibles before rebranding back to DC Direct before in the last year or so. But during that DC Collectibles line, they really went all in on sort of artist-specific designs, as we already mentioned, a Greg Capullo line. They did a whole line of figures. They did artist, I believe they were called designer series, basically. So you had specific series that were dedicated to specific artists, which again is something else that we are sorely going to miss with not having a DC Direct out there. So one of the ones that became such a marketing juggernaut, and I think became a lot bigger than maybe originally expected, was the Aunt Lucia Bombshells line. And Liam, this came from some originally, correct me if I'm wrong, but they were just covers, sort of alternate covers that he had done for different lines, basically pinup drawings based on 1930s and 40s pinups that he did of various different characters. Since then, it's become, like I said, a marketing juggernaut for them. They've had their own comic series. They've had different spin-offs of other different collectibles. It's one of their main money makers, clearly, because they still market it today. Not too often you get an offshoot of a series based on just a couple of comic art covers, but this is an example of some beautiful artwork that was translated into 3D. And again, this is something I feel like there are a couple in this line that maybe you're like, that's not quite exactly a hit. But I think some of this line also suffered from budget cuts. Some things were cut from the original showings and prototypes of these action figures, but I still think it's a gorgeous wave. So there are only 2 waves of this. There were more figures that were planned multiple times that were solicited and then got cut and then resolicited and then cut again. I think it started out more. There are more statues from this line, but again, we aren't covering statues here on these 2 episodes. So I'm talking, of course, about the Bombshells line from 2017. So there are 2 waves that were actually released. Wave 1 has Batwoman, Harley Quinn, Poison Ivy, and Wonder Woman, and then Wave 2 is Batgirl, Hawkgirl, Katana, and Mira. Liam, again, this is something that DC marketed very well and then translated into this more modern era where you have more articulation. You're able to pose these characters in similar poses that they were in their comic covers, which leads to great figure photography and more people wanting to promote these figures by putting them in different pinup poses from the 1940s. The artwork is fantastic, and I think the figures translate very well.
Agreed. Yeah, both sets are really, really cool and well done. The standouts to me, though, are you sort of have the Wonder Woman is very much like a Rosie the Riveter style. Like she has like the bandana in her hair, kind of representing the tiara. I love the accessories she's come with. I think that one really stands out to me. I really love that Mira too. Like I think Mira is a character, certainly with her introduction into the movies, that is getting a little bit more play, a little bit more attention from, and hopefully will continue to, and when it comes to toy lines and other collectibles going forward. But I love that, like the sort of the very old school sailor, sort of old Navy uniform, with the trident and everything. Like I think that Mira really stands out to me as well. But that, I think, and the Wonder Woman are the two for me.
Yeah, those are very strong. I think that a Wonder Woman looks straight off of the page. It's a very good 3D representation, as we've highlighted so many in each of the series that we've covered here. I think that the only one that I don't necessarily care for, that I don't feel like translated as well, is the Batgirl, which is a shame, because the Batgirl is sort of a marrying of the modern look with the purple and the gold, and the Batgirl of Burnside look mixed with the classic 40s look. And that's, to me, incorporating so many of the things from that era translate very well to these figures. As you mentioned, the accessories that come with Wonder Woman was great. Accessories got sort of cut later on in some of the later series as they were doing budget cuts, I guess. So you don't have as many figures, but I think the Poison Ivy is great. Obviously, she's styled after Betty Page, who's the icon of pinups in the 1940s, and so she visually looks very similar to that. But of course, she's got this bright green skin that the Poison Ivy character has. So the fact that they were able to translate that looks really awesome. But I think, to me, the one that is also getting some play nowadays based on her look upcoming in The Suicide Squad, is the Harley Quinn figure. The goggles that she incorporates in this costume are also, along with the leather jacket, are featured prominently in the Suicide Squad footage that we just saw over the weekend at DC Fandom. So some of this artwork being translated into modern day movies and having influence also, I think, adds a lot to these action figures. So when you're able to see elements like that translated into what movie makers and costume designers are doing in the live action films or in the live action TV series, I think always adds a little bit to that. So that figure, it comes with alternate hands. There's one where she's throwing up a peace sign. They pose very well. She comes with multiple accessories. I would also be remiss not to mention the fact that Batwoman, who's in a like 1940s sort of a League of Their Own baseball outfit, comes with a baseball and a bat that she can hold both of them, and a ball glove, and she's wearing this 1940s women's baseball uniform.
They don't call her Batwoman for nothing.
That's right. It's so great. And I love, like, I have the full set, being able to pose these in different poses, as opposed to just, I'm not really a poser as it were when it comes to my figures. I sort of have them standing in sort of a statuesque pose a lot of the time, but these figures, you can't help but pose them in different ways because they just look so great in doing so. So huge appreciation for this line. There was a couple figures that I was looking forward to. There was a Black Canary that was due out, and a Joker actually that was going to be part of the line that got canceled also. So a little disappointing that this series, I think there was a Bumblebee also that got canceled. So there's a few that were kind of left on the cutting room floor, as it were, that would have been nice to add to the collection. But overall, it doesn't feel like there's a gaping hole in this set either, because you have a nice roster of 8 that rounds everything out.
Yeah, I think so. Like there's a couple, again, this gets more into the statue game, but there's been so many statues of other characters who didn't get figures, like Supergirl, like Starfire, like Black Canary, as you mentioned, that was close but no cigar on actually getting a figure in this set. So there's still quite a few, and obviously there's a great Supergirl and Superman statue where she's sort of lifting him up on her shoulder, and he's in like the very old timey male one-piece bathing suit. It's a great, that's my statue honorable mention for any of these series is. There's some really great collectibles from this set. But yeah, I think as a series, as just an action figure series, since that's what we're focused on, I think, yeah, especially the ones we've sort of focused here. Like I said, I love the look of that Mira, and then I love the the accessories especially, and sort of the overall package of both the Wonder Woman and the Batwoman as well.
As a DCAU fan, I would be remiss not to mention the Shayera Hall Hawkgirl also is pretty good looking. Pretty cool what they did with her. Sort of a Rocketeer inspired look with hers.
Definitely. It's cool to see characters who were probably a little underutilized or undercared for, who were then sort of given new life in these cartoons that we love and review on our regular episodes every Saturday, and getting to see them then get to be injected back into some of these alternate lines and some of the main DC comics it's always quite a bit of fun. So yeah, it's cool that she made the cut for this relatively small line.
Fantastic. Well, Liam, I think that will wrap us up for our spotlight here. This is going to be, we're drawing the end of part 1 to a close here. We will have a part 2 where we highlight some more of our favorites in this DC Direct Retrospective, but we're not going to close this episode out before we add one question. I know we're going to ask this question of each other, and then, of course, we'd love to hear feedback from listeners on their thoughts also on the same question.
For sure. We are wrapping it up with just a very simple question, which is, what is one figure that you feel is missing from a DC Direct toy line? Specifically, let's keep it to the lines that we talked about today. What is one figure from one of those lines that you feel like that's the one missing piece? That's the holy grail of this set that we never quite got to for various reasons. Which one is on your list, Cal?
I went back and forth on this. I think I'm going to have to go to the Batman, Superman, Public Enemies line, and I'm going to have to go with Connor Kent Superboy. And we talked about how that, weirdly enough, a guy in t-shirt and jeans is somewhat toyetic, that character was so incredibly popular at that time. We already talked about how the Teen Titans figure is extremely rare. It's a very expensive figure. And I think just seeing Ed McGuinness' style of Superboy, albeit a t-shirt and jeans, he does play a pretty pivotal role in that line there. And to me, is a gaping hole. He's probably the one that I would add to that list, all things considered. What about you?
Yeah, that's a great one, and a good point about he's only in it for a little bit there, but it's a pretty memorable issue, as we talked about. Mine would be similarly, and again, we may have that Mike McKone Teen Titans line to blame for this, unfortunately, as much as I love that version of that character in that set. But as we talked about, that Jim Lee Hush, the Jeff Loeb Jim Lee Hush storyline, that goes through pretty much meeting every Bat Family character. Everyone kind of gets a spotlight, or a lot of them do. And then almost all of them got made into figures in those 3 sets of Hush, except for one, that of course being Robin, Tim Drake. It's a very memorable issue that sort of involves Tim and Catwoman sort of having an argument in the Batcave, and him sort of questioning her loyalty. And then we go to, maybe, in my opinion, Cal, this might be controversial, the most iconic image of any issue.
I think it definitely is. I already know we haven't even talked about this, and I know what it is.
Yes. So as we mentioned, there's sort of this mystery character, Hush, who has been dealing with this. In the midst of this, they go to a graveyard where the Scarecrow has been. The Huntress is sort of losing her mind. Batman tells Robin to stay put while he goes to get a closer look. We see someone attack Robin from behind, refer to him as a pretender. And then we get maybe the most iconic image, I'll say it, that Jim Lee has ever drawn.
Wow.
Which is, we see the Hush, this supposed Hush, remove his mask. It is Jason Todd with a white streak in his hair, holding a knife, or as we find out later, it's actually, I think, a batarang, to the neck of Tim Drake. And he says, "Life's just a game, Batman, and this time you lose," with the idea. And that's your cliffhanger for that issue. I think, especially if you read the single issues of that book, having that be your cliffhanger for an entire month of not only Jason Todd returning, but immediately going after the Robin who replaced him, at least appearing to that to be the case. That's such an iconic moment, and Tim's sort of, although it's a small role in that issue, is such an important one. And again, for that sort of big reveal that appears to be that Jason Todd is the Hush character, that's such a big and important moment. I think it's, to me, is, if it's not the most iconic Jim Lee page ever, it's top 3 for me.
I think it's okay to have that as your opinion. I think that's it is visually very strong, and like it's one of those that I will remember for the rest of my life just because of the impact that it made. Even in the advertisement, as we already talked about, the Toy Fair exclusive Jason Todd Hush figure, that image was the one that they used in the marketing for that. Him with his hands around, or his arm sort of wrapped around Tim's neck, in sort of a headlock type maneuver, looking directly, you kind of looking from Batman's perspective at him in this. Yeah, that's one of the, and I think it's certainly acceptable to say the most iconic image from that series.
Yeah, and so for me, that is the gaping hole here, is that obviously we did get that awesome, as we talked about, that Toy Fair exclusive Jason, which is, the only thing I wish, it was pretty much just a re-release of the Hush figure with a new head, which, don't get me wrong, it's a great looking figure, but he still has the 2 guns.
Yeah.
I mean, if I had a nitpick to make, it would have been cool if maybe one of the hands was holding a knife or a batarang in it instead, but that's nitpicking there. But it's such a great figure, and not having Tim in that line, again, it's probably because this contemporary Mike McKone Teen Titans line was out at the and they didn't want to release 2 of a similar version of the same character both at once. But to me, that is the one hole in that Hush line for me, is that there isn't a Tim Drake, maybe even one that's sort of set in that scene where sort of the rain is there and his hair is all wet and kind of hanging down a little bit, something like that, or with the bandage wrapped around his neck that Catwoman gives him after Batman is sort of broken off with the alleged Jason Todd to fight, and he's still bleeding. Catwoman hands him something to kind of tie up his neck so he doesn't bleed out on the spot. So yeah, that would have been my one request. If we like to say, we put it out into the universe, we'll see what happens. Maybe one day it could still happen, but yeah, that to me is the one hole in that Hush line, and the one that I would, more than any other figure, as I've mentioned, I've slowly but surely either acquired or reacquired pretty much every Tim Drake Robin figure, and the fact that there isn't a Jim Lee Robin to go along with the Jim Lee Batman and Nightwing and Catwoman of that set is kind of a bummer to me. But yeah, that's my white whale, I guess.
There you go. I think that's a fair statement. I think that set is, I think probably could have squeezed one final set out of that, thinking about it, but maybe we'll cover that on part 2 of this of this DC DirectRospective. So that will wrap up part 1. Thank you everybody for listening. If you checked us out here, don't forget, subscribe to us on our regular feed Saturdays, 10, 9 Central. We have our standard episodes that drop. We review an episode every week of a classic Batman or DCAU cartoon. This upcoming month here, we'll be covering a month of Green Lantern episodes, which we are very excited about. So we'll be in various DCAU and other forms of animation. We'll be covering some Green Lantern stuff in honor of his 80th anniversary. Don't forget, you can also check us out at DCAUreview.com for the entire archives of past bonus episodes and new episodes every Saturday. Make sure you follow us on Instagram and Twitter at DCAU Review. Liam, brief preview of part 2 of this bonus episode, DC DirectRospective. What do the good people have in store for us in part 2?
Yes, so part 1, as we said, was very artist focused, and there will be a little bit of that included in part 2, but this is more about big sort of tentpole event series that went several sets, and that includes something like maybe a certain Batman video game series or a certain Lantern zombie comic book event. And we have several of those, as well as you might expect. If you've looked at the name of the podcast, we have quite a few DCAU examples to chat about when it comes to these DC Direct / DC collectible lines as well, which we will certainly be going to in depth on those as well. So quite a bit to look forward to as we look toward part 2.
That's right. And until next time, I am Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
To be continued.